Good morning. How are y'all doing? I heard that, I thought. If you sit on the front row, I can hear. Good to see y'all. Hey, let's open our Bibles to 1 Samuel chapter 2. I'm going to move this. I don't think I need it now that I've got the lapel. So last week we were looking at Hannah's song in chapter 2. And this week we're picking up right after that in verse 12. So verse 12 is where we will be. 1 Samuel chapter 2. I hope y'all had a good week. Busy week for me, probably busy week for a lot of y'all. I've got some of my kids, what do you call it, snot on my shoulder. That's how you know, the dads in the room and the moms, have these patches here, these badges of honor. So, y'all don't judge me too hard for that. All right, so we're in 1 Samuel chapter 2, and just to bring everybody up to speed, I see some new faces with us today, so that's great. Samuel marks a really significant transition in the Old Testament story between the days when God's people were more divided into tribes and ruled by judges to a more unified monarchy and the kingship. So we know that Samuel will tell us the story eventually of David and of first King Saul. And so we're making our way there. Right now we have Eli, who is a priest to the Lord at Shiloh. This is when the temple, whatever kind of structure this would have been, it's kind of interesting to think about, was in Shiloh, not in Jerusalem, as we tend to think about it. So Hannah, of course, is barren and wants a child and prays for that child, and God grants her wish, and then she sings this song or offers this prayer in chapter 2. And if you get nothing else from chapter 2 or no other lens through which to look at this prayer of hers, think about divine reversal. This is a key theme that we see here in this prayer and see picked up in the Gospel of Luke. And as we compared last week, the Magnificat, Mary's song, after encountering Elizabeth, after both of those women are pregnant, how Mary's song also really emphasizes this theme of reversal. The high brought low, the low brought up, and so on and so forth. All right, so now we're in verse 12, and I want to start with just reading. We'll read a kind of a chunk and then make some comments on it and have some time to talk about it. So this is just a read through the text kind of class and comment as we go. All right, now the sons of Eli. We met these sons back in chapter 1. The sons of Eli were worthless men. They did not know the Lord. Verse 13, the custom of the priests with the people was that when any man offered sacrifice, the priest's servant would come while the meat was boiling with a three-pronged fork in his hand, and he would thrust it into the pan or kettle or cauldron or pot, and that fork brought up the priest would take for himself. This is what they did at Shiloh to all the Israelites who came there. Verse 15, moreover, before the fat was burned, the priest's servant would come and say to the man who was sacrificing, give meat for the priest to roast, for he will not accept boiled meat from you, but only raw. And if the man said to him, let them burn the fat first, and then take as much as you wish, he would say, no, you must give it now, and if not, I will take it by force. Verse 17, thus the sin of the young men was very great in the sight of the Lord, for the men treated the offering of the Lord with contempt. Verse 18, Samuel was ministering before the Lord, a boy clothed with a linen ephod, and his mother used to make for him a little robe and take it to him each year when she went up with her husband to offer the yearly sacrifice. And then Eli would bless Elkanah and his wife and say, "May the Lord give you children by this woman for the petition she asked of the Lord." And then they would return to their home. Indeed, the Lord visited Hannah. She conceived and bore 3 sons and 2 daughters. And the boy Samuel grew in the presence of the Lord. All right, so we will try to get through chapter 2 today, just so you know where I hope to land, so that we get to the call of Samuel next week, which is a more well-known passage. But here we get this little aside, or this little rabbit trail into some of the practices there at Shiloh regarding the sons of Eli. Now, what are the sons of Eli? What are their names? Yes, okay. And we see that down in verse 3 of chapter 1, Hophni and Phinehas. And I had not known this detail, but when I was reading commentaries like this one here, I've got about 3 commentaries I'm looking at as I prepared. This one's written by David Toshio Sumura, the first book of Samuel, and the New International Commentary on the Old Testament. So I've enjoyed this one. There's a couple others I'm looking at as I read this, but one of the things that I learned was that those names in origin are Egyptian, which is just an interesting little detail. They're not kind of a Jewish name like Shiloh would be, or Eli or whatever. But Hophni and Phinehas are Egyptian names, which, not to be too tribalistic or territorial or whatnot, but it does maybe signal to us as readers who are able to hear that kind of echo of, oh, that's a strange name. What kind of, how does that name belong there in that place? To get us thinking, maybe there's more to these characters than, at first meets the eye. So let's see how these 2 turn out. So their names are, I'm not saying that they're from Egypt, or I'm not saying that they're, adopted or that kind of thing, but it does give us a kind of a little bit of a signal, a little bit of a flag that goes up to say, pay attention to these 2. More will be told. So we're told that these 2 sons are worthless men. Now, I should have read verse 11 too, because this sets us up for what comes later. Elkanah went home to Ramah. This is after Hannah's prayer, where they're from. They go home, and the boy, Samuel, was ministering to the Lord in the presence of Eli the priest. So what we'll see throughout this is this contrast between whom? Between Samuel and Eli's sons. Well, yeah, Eli and Eli's sons. So we because of the age, I think we're more to associate, how Samuel is coming up versus how Hophni and Phinehas are coming up, because Eli in some way is kind of like a surrogate dad, right? I mean, he's taking care of Eli from after he's weaned, so he's kind of helping to raise him. And his own sons have not turned out very good, or at least they fall away at some point. But it says that they're worthless men. Now, we did make this connection earlier. Let me notice, back when Hannah is praying in chapter 1, this is some of those textual literary details that I find are really interesting. Do you remember when she first comes and prays before Eli? And what does Eli think? Yeah, that she's drunk, right? And so here is this incompetent priest who has a truly sincere person in the house of worship praying to God, just like it was designed for kind of the ideal situation. And the priest, the man of God, thinks this woman is intoxicated. Like that's what he thinks. That's what he assumes about her. Let me see if I can find. So in this is chapter 1, if you're looking at this. And verse 13, she's speaking in her heart, only her lips are moving. So you can kind of picture this scene where someone is praying so fervently, and they're just... And you're thinking, now what is going on with this person? But she's so kind of intense, and she's kind of forgot herself and pouring herself out before the Lord. And Eli just barges in and says to her in verse 14, "How long will you go on being drunk? Put away wine from you," right? And maybe he's too used to dealing with his own children, perhaps. And she says there in verse 16, "Do not regard your servant as a worthless woman." You see that word worthless? Any of you have a different translation with a different word for worthless? What is it?
Wicked.
Wicked and troubled. Okay. Troubled in spirit. Okay. Now, here's another thing that I picked up on in this commentary is this word is a really interesting word in the Hebrew. It can mean something like worthless, but in its origin, it seems to point us to the name of a sort of goddess. Belial, I think, is the name of the goddess, like a local deity there that was associated and came to be associated with like worthlessness. And so it can be translated as like worthless, like just a kind of normal adjective, somebody who's worthless, or it may have stronger connections to somebody who was caught up in a certain cult of religion at one time. So anyway, it's a really interesting term, but what's most interesting here for our purposes is it's the same word that's used in verse 12 of chapter 2, where the sons of Eli were worthless men. So here is Eli in chapter 1 thinking Hannah is worthless, or she thinks maybe that's what he thinks about her, and she says, no, I'm not that. And yet the narrator tells us, as a matter of fact, that the sons of Eli were these worthless people, right? Yeah, David.
Yeah, on that one it says daughter of Baal.
Yes.
On the other one it says sons of Baal.
Okay, yours is the King James, is that right? Okay, so that's right. That's getting to that difference. So depending on how we want to translate that and what we're to make of what we know of that. But if you want to read more, there's a couple paragraphs in this commentary that kind of give you some more clues on where that comes from.
It kind of seems that he's relating her to his two sons.
Yeah,
He
yeah.
talks about sons of Baal and daughter of Baal.
Yeah. Or she's worried that he will do that, right? Because she's the one who says, I don't know if he says to her, "You're a worthless woman," but she's the one who says, "Don't regard me as that. Don't put me in that category." So there's an association there, though, in the text between what Hannah is perceived to be and not, and what the sons of Eli should not have been but were, right, as the priests of the Lord. Okay, so then we have they're worthless men, both of them. Now, in Genesis 4, we meet two sons of Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel. And one was good, and one turned out not to be so good. But here we have two sons who are both evil, right? There's not one of them that's good. So they're both just wicked. So, if there had been one that was good and the other one that wasn't, you could say, well, maybe, Eli did okay, or there's some good here. But no, they're both worthless. So I don't know what that says about Eli. But it says they did not know the Lord. Now, isn't that interesting? What does that mean? What does it mean to know the Lord, you think, in the way it's used here? Like they're the priests. They're helping their father, serve at this temple. They know the Lord, but they don't know the Lord. Yes, sir?
I blame it on Eli, not telling
Okay.
preachers to do what God said.
Okay. So maybe there's a fault of their father who's not preached enough to them or told them enough. That's a good aside. As much as we here in the church, I'm so grateful we have, I think, phenomenal Bible classes for our children and great teachers, great leaders of that. But also, those of us with children, we're responsible for teaching our kids, right, how to pray and to know God's word. That's a challenge for me. But yeah, maybe it's a lack of information. Yeah. Right. Yeah. I think that's it. It's personal relationship with the Lord. It's not that they did not know with their mind, that they didn't have the information, they didn't know the Bible. I don't think it was that. Maybe that's certainly probably part of it too. But I think the deeper issue is they did not know him. This word for know is the same word that's sometimes used for like sexual relations. I'm pretty sure that this is the same word for that. And when a man knows his wife in the Bible, y'all have read this language before. And so it's an intimate kind of sharing together. And it can be used too of like a relationship, of being close and intimate and truly knowing someone, not just, I know your name, I know, I've been to your house or something, but I really know you as a friend. And so there's all kinds of irony here, isn't there, in this story, where you have these people who are in the temple of the Lord, and if anyone on the face of the planet should have known the Lord, it was this family and these two sons. And here is to your point, here is the priest of the Lord who's trying to, pass on faith to Israel and to the world, and isn't able to do that with his own children. And so there's just a complete kind of disintegration. In the larger story, one of the things that all of this is doing is it is preparing for a transition, right? It is going to show how the house of Eli and his rule is ultimately rejected by God, and God is going to do something new. So that's part of what all of this fallout is kind of paving toward with the overall story of Samuel, is God is going to reject this, and we'll read about that in just a moment, reject Eli and even his lineage beyond Hophni and Phinehas, and make way for something new. All right, so then we come to this. I'm seeing if there's any hands. I thought I saw some, but yeah, David again.
Well, God says, if you love me, you'll keep my commandments.
Okay, yeah.
The relationship we have with God, we love him, we don't do what he says.
That's right. That's a great point. And part of this not knowing is they did not fear him, they did not obey him, did not do what they knew they should be doing. And so they see this, I think, is it Peter or is it Paul who says some see the gospel as a means to an end, or as a means of gain, is what he says. And so certainly these sons of Eli were taking advantage of their position. So we read about this custom, and there's some kind of pointers that we get in Leviticus and other passages in the Old Testament about what might have been going on here. In verse 13, the custom of the priests with the people was that when any man offered sacrifice, the priest's servant would come, and while the meat was boiling with the three-pronged fork in his hand, he would thrust it into the pan or kettle or cauldron or pot. So we really need to picture this. There's all kinds of different, utensils and, not utensils, but, it might have been a skillet, it might have been a pot, it might have been it's kind of funny to me that there's like 4 things mentioned. It could either be a pan or a kettle or a cauldron or a pot. Okay, so this was the extent of their kitchen.
Sacrifice.
Maybe so, based on the sizes of the sacrifice.
Kettle that big around.
Yeah.
Maybe you're making a bigger sacrifice than you can if you had just a little pot.
Yeah, good point. So maybe it has mostly to do with the size of it. I didn't think they had that many dishes. This was before Bed Bath & Beyond, and who knew? So all kinds of shapes. All that the fork brought up, the priest would take for himself. So there's something, it seems as though there's something calculated about what's going on here. There's a 3-pronged fork going into this to get some meat. And maybe there's some rolling the dice sort of thing that would have happened where you closed your eyes, kind of like pin the tail on the donkey, and try to bring up some meat. But it seems like they're taking advantage of this sort of practice to take out of this pot more than their fair share. And then we get some more information about that. This is what they did at Shiloh to all the Israelites who came there. Moreover, and this is verse 15, this is maybe the where they really took advantage of it. Before the fat was burned, the priest servant would come up and say to the man sacrificing, "Give meat for the priest to roast, for he will not accept boiled meat from you, but only raw." Now, what were they supposed to do with the fat? Burn it, right? As a pleasing aroma to the Lord, right? Before the sacrifice. But what did Eli's sons want? They wanted it before it burned up or kind of came off of the meat, right? They wanted more of it, and maybe this choicest part. And the part that would burn up before, it would be for the Lord, right? The Lord's part. And this is the part that the sons of Eli are saying we want for ourselves, the Lord's part. Now that gets into some dangerous territory, doesn't it? To say, not just more than our fair share, but what was supposed to be his, we want for ourselves.
It's a way of taking care of the priest.
Yes.
They got legitimately a portion of the sacrifice.
Yes.
And had plenty to eat. But these guys didn't just want something to eat, they wanted the very best.
Yes. Yeah. They wanted their pick of everything. Yeah. That's a good. Let's look at a few passages with that. Yeah, Carol.
I have one comment that,
Yes, sir.
when Eli dies, he falls out of the chair, he breaks his neck.
Yep.
It says because he was fat.
Mm.
So maybe justification
Payback.
filled the fat by his sons and his own.
Yes. Okay. Also because the Lord killed him, right? But yes. Carol, you weren't supposed to give away that he dies. That's a spoiler. We were saving that. No, everybody was wondering how it turned out for him. No, I'm just kidding. I think we already mentioned that. All right, let's look at a couple of verses. In verse Leviticus, go back a few. Keep your finger in 1 Samuel 2. Just give you some verses here about the priests. Yeah, the priests were God. This was part of God's design for how the sacrificial system worked, was that the priest family would get some of what was sacrificed, right? And then after the sacrifice, the family would enjoy everything else after the sacrifice. So it wasn't as though the priests were not supposed to have any of what the Lord had, what was brought in sacrifice. But it's the abuse of that system that we're seeing in 1 Samuel 2. So in the grain offerings, for instance, in Leviticus 2, when anyone brings a grain offering as an offering to the Lord, his offering shall be of fine flour. He shall pour oil on it and put frankincense on it and bring it to Aaron's sons, the priests, and he shall take it from it a handful of the fine flour and oil with all of its frankincense, and the priest shall burn this as a memorial portion on the altar, a food offering, a pleasing aroma to the Lord. But the rest of the grain offering shall be for Aaron and Aaron's sons, that is the priests. It is a most holy part of the Lord's food offering. So there we have the provision for the priests. I think we see that again in verse 10 there in Leviticus 2. The rest of the grain offering for Aaron and his sons. So this is written into the instruction of sacrifice, that part of this does go to the priest and their family. Go back to Numbers 18 and verse 8. I had to write these down because I knew somebody would ask about this, Don. I knew it, saw it coming. I do not know these verses off the top of my head is what I'm saying there. All right, Numbers chapter 18 and verse 8. The Lord spoke to Aaron, behold, I've given you charge of the contributions made to me, to Aaron, again the priest, all the consecrated things of the people of Israel. I have given them to you as a portion and to your sons as a perpetual due. If you want to go to the New Testament, we see the same thing practiced, or the same principle applied by Paul in 1 Corinthians chapter 9. Verse 13 and following, where Paul, as an aside there in 1 Corinthians 9:13, do you not know that those who are employed in the temple service get their food from the temple, and those who serve at the altar share in the sacrificial offerings? And then in 1 Timothy 5:17, Paul will make a similar point about those who lead, and specifically there he is talking about elders in the church, shepherds who are who labor among you worthy of double honor. Let me see if I can find 1 Timothy 5:17. Let the elders who rule well. You notice that adverb. Be considered worthy of double honor, especially those who labor in preaching and teaching. So those are specifically elders that Paul has in mind, who are worthy of, kind of in this system that God has written up, worthy of getting a portion of this. So where do the sons of Eli go wrong then? is the question. If this is part of greed. Yeah. Say more about that, Don, if you would.
Well, they didn't want something to eat.
Yeah.
They wanted the very best, the
Right.
part that was reserved for the Lord.
Yeah.
And so that's where the problem was. It
Yeah.
wasn't that they were eating the meat.
Yeah.
It was boiled, but that they wanted the fat and the meat.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
they didn't want it offered to the Lord. They wanted it for themselves.
Good. Yeah, it almost reminds me of, that when God gives the manna in the wilderness and says, don't take more, take enough. I'm going to give you enough to eat, but don't kind of try to store it and keep it and get more than you actually need. And the very next day, what do the people do? It's kind of comical if it wasn't so sad. They disregard what Moses had said, and they get more, and it goes bad and all of this. And God's like, I told you, let me tell you again. So it's sort of like that. God is good to us, but do we have a tendency to want to grasp at more than we need, more than, in a way that not only is greedy, but is ungrateful to what God has already given us? Yes, sir.
We all love fat in our meat.
I do.
And that,
Yeah.
it's not 30, 70, we might not even want to fix that hamburger. I see that's what they were doing. They were just putting God's portion of fat back into their food, just to enhance the flavor, just
Yeah.
to please themselves.
Yeah.
Their attitude was, if you don't give it to me, I'm going to take it up.
Yes. And here's a really interesting, again, paying attention just to how this is written is really fascinating. Even here in English, we can see this. When you look at verse 15. Before the fat was burned, the priest's servant. So I don't know, is this Hophni and Phinehas, I guess, or is it someone else? But the whole system here seems to be that there's other people, or maybe this family's in cahoots on this. But I'm kind of thinking it's Hophni and Phinehas. But they say, listen to the language, give meat for the priest to roast. And isn't it interesting that they don't say, give it to me, give it to us, give it to Eli, but they use this like third person language. Why are they doing that? Isn't that manipulative a little bit to use the title and the office and to say, give this to us because we're in this place of authority. This is not Hophni, Phinehas, or just Eli or me. This is the priest of the Lord. You need to respect this office. And more irony that they're the ones who are abusing this authority, but they're using the title. They're using this place of privilege to demand things from the people that they ought not demand. I kept thinking of James 3:1 that talks about not many of you should be teachers because we'll be judged with greater strictness. And I think those of us, specifically those of us who lead in a congregation, need to be careful about how we use our title or position for our own gain, to kind of hold over people's heads or quietly manipulate folks. It's a temptation. When all else fails, we can go to that and appeal to this authority that we think we have.
Could it be a form of nepotism?
What do you mean by that, Hunter?
Kids, demanding because my dad's a priest, we're the priest, and then the dad not doing anything about it. Could this be like spoiled kids?
Oh yeah, I think so. I think that's a good point. And yeah, it's a misunderstanding of the priest. Kind of like the word minister really just means a servant, right? That's what it means, a servant. But yeah, sometimes ministers may think, oh, this is a place of power rather than a position from which to serve. And I think similarly with your point there of they're using their status, their lineage, to work the system. They think that they have rights that they're entitled to because, hey, my dad is Eli. And it makes me think of what John the Baptist says in Matthew 3 to the Pharisees that come to him and say, don't you know that, don't say, well, we have Abraham for our father, so God has to be good to us because look where we come from. But he says, don't you know God can raise up children for Abraham from these stones? God can, Hophni and Phinehas, it's not because you're related to Eli or, do what God has called you to do, who God has called you to be. Don't turn your position into a weapon. Yes, ma'am.
I was just wondering if you had any idea who their mother was. You said they had Egyptian names,
Yeah.
and maybe she influenced them.
Yeah, good point. I don't know. I don't think we're told that. If anybody knows, it must be Mickey, but he either doesn't know or, I don't know. That's a great question. That may be, right? Like Hagar was, I'll go back to the echoes from Abraham and Sarah. Hagar was Egyptian servant, right? So there was some definitely close in proximity, and here we have, Israel, of course, has come out of Egypt. But I don't know that we're told who their mother would be. But it does make us wonder. It's one of those gaps in the information we're given. And we talked about that on the first day, how the story never tells us everything we want to know. And as frustrating as that is, I think it's also by design. Because when we don't have details, then we have to fill in some details with our imagination. In good ways, right? In good ways. This is the struggle of anyone who's ever made a movie on, the life of Christ or something, where you're like, did it happen that way? Did they really have that look in their eye when they said those words? And we just don't know. And so it's not just, sometimes we get upset, or I hear people get upset of the movie makers who take, Moses or whatever, Noah, Jesus, and they add to. Well, if you're going to try to make any kind of movie or tell any kind of story, you're going to have to add to, because we just don't have a lot in here. You're going to have to make decisions about what were they wearing, what color was it, how tall were they, all kinds of details we don't have. So that's a great example of, it makes you wonder, had Eli, married an Egyptian, married someone who wasn't an Israelite, or maybe didn't have faith, and maybe that's part of the problem that we're seeing here. Yes, Hunter again, and then David.
If you look back at verse 9, because at 15 it says, give the
Yes.
word to say that they'll take it. Verse 16. If you look back at Hannah's song in verse 9, it says, he keeps the feet of his godly ones, but the wicked ones are silence of darkness, for not by might shall we prevail.
Yeah. And the might.
Yeah, because they're saying, give it to me.
Yes. Yeah, and I hear even the, down in verse 16, mine says, no, you must give it now, and if not, I will take it by force. And so there's a threat of violence here.
So what ultimately happens to them is proven.
That's right. Foreshadowed, or foretold, exactly. So it's interesting to think of how her song really does ripple out into this story. Yeah, David.
I heard the song gets voiced, and it had to be from the 1800s or backwards. It was not getting rid of a saddle. I've had thoughts from God about doing things, and anyhow, it brought my attention to what he's told me to do, and I thought about that as well as the saddle, not getting rid of the saddle, where you can get around to share God's word.
I'd like to hear more about that, David, about what you're thinking there and what God's spoken to you about.
God talks to all of us.
In different ways, leads us. Yes.
He gives us instructions to do,
Yes.
and that made me think about back in the 1800s, when you had a horse and a saddle, and not to get rid of that saddle.
Yeah. Well, let's look at verse 17. Just moving on. We are not going to get through the chapter 2, are we? It's not looking good with 6 minutes left. The sin of the young men was very great in the sight of the Lord. The men treated the offering of the Lord with contempt. Okay. All right, now we see the contrast again. The narrative just goes right back to Samuel. And we're kind of supposed to see, I'm sure, the contrast, the stark contrast here. There's no kind of segue into this. It's just right back to Samuel. Samuel was ministering before the Lord, a boy clothed with a linen ephod. Now, if you go back to verse 11, I mentioned this, that I forgot to start there. The boy, Samuel, was ministering to the Lord in the presence of Eli the priest. We may have a subtle shift here. Samuel was ministering before the Lord, and there's no mention of Eli the priest here. So is this the story's way of quietly dropping Eli out because of his unfaithfulness? I find that interesting. So he's clothed with the linen ephod. So he's like, what the priest would wear, this kind of long garment that the priest would wear, but he's like a little boy priest, right? And I read that and think he must have looked pretty cute. I don't know why. I just think that this Samuel little boy wearing this little ephod would have been really, really cute. All right. And this makes you, your heart warms even more here. His mother used to make for him a little robe and take it to him each year when she went up with her husband to offer the yearly sacrifice. So how many times a year does Hannah get to see Samuel? Maybe just once a year. Now, we're not told if she gets to see him more than that. It seems like maybe just once a year. We're not told if she gets to spend a week with him or just, 30 minutes or something. How many of our mothers would be content seeing your kid just once a year? But to think of the, I don't know, in this day and time, Eva, you sew a little bit, right? Or you have, or people who have. How long do you think it would take you to make an ephod, like a long robe? And if you were using primitive tools 2,000, 3,000 years ago, yeah, it might take you a long time, right? And so I kind of like to think maybe this is something Hannah just worked on, thought of her boy all the time and prayed for him and made this. It wasn't something she went to the store and bought the day before. It's something that she poured her heart into making. I should have asked Joanne about sewing. So, Joanne, how long would it take you to make this? A while. Yeah, to do it right? So, yeah, and so maybe it took the whole year. And then you think every year she would make it a little bit bigger and to fit him more. So, the kind of love and support. And, it does make you think, too. I think we looked at this verse in, is it Zechariah 3, not by might, but by my spirit. I can't think of the citation there, but not by might, but by my spirit. This old Christian writer named Brother Lawrence, who wrote the little book, The Practice of the Presence of God, said, those who are carried along by the Spirit move forward even in sleep. That's a beautiful idea, isn't it? That if we have the Spirit, we are, even when we sleep, we get more done than someone who doesn't have the Spirit. And I think, it's not about our effort. It's not solely about our effort. It's not solely about our energy, the time we put into something. Is God part of this? And you think of the difference it made. Eli, who's there with his own children, who end up terrible folks, versus Hannah's effect on her son once a year, but through a woman of prayer and the love there. And God did more with that little than he did with Eli's much. And so there's a principle there, I think, for us too, that it's not about our efforts, whether in parenting or in ministry or at work or at home or wherever, but it's about, is the Lord's Spirit in it? All right, so this little priest, and Eli would bless Elkanah. Now, here's some of the almost the two ways that this text talks about Eli is incompetent, his sons are terrible, and yet he is still the priest. He's still the priest, and he still has some kind of authority and power to bless. And so Eli would bless Elkanah and his wife and say, "May the Lord give you children by this woman for the petition she asked of the Lord." And then they would return home. Indeed, the Lord visited Hannah. She conceived and bore 3 sons and 2 daughters. And the boy Samuel grew in the presence of the Lord. So just as in chapter 1, we're left wondering, was it Eli's kind of granting of her prayer or verbalizing that that was the key that unlocked? I think most of us would say, no, it was God. It had nothing to do with Eli. Eli's a priest. We have one mediator between God and man, the man Christ Jesus. We don't believe in priests and their words and that kind of thing. But the text seems to suggest that, well, the priest said something and then something changed. If you're just reading the story, it seems like, no, the words of the priest, and here it seems again like the priest is saying, yes, the Lord do this for you, and they have 5 more kids. So the Lord, and maybe the point there is the Lord gave back to Hannah more than she had given to him, right? If you give to the Lord, and it was her first, and maybe at that point, this might be the only kid I ever have, giving everything away. And yet the Lord gives back these 5 other children to Hannah. So beautiful story. Any last word? David, did I see your hand again?
Yeah, I was saying that, you talk about the frequency that she saw him. That was her prayer to give him to the Lord. And I think it showed her trust even in God directing him.
Yeah.
By the frequency that she didn't worry about seeing.
Yeah. Amen. And in some ways, you think of Hannah's great faith, and Eli plays a part. She knows Eli. She's going to him for prayer to this place, and she turns her boy over. But in some ways, it had nothing to do with Eli, did it? And her concern wasn't on Eli. And I think there's a word there for us, too, of, when we come to worship, sometimes our focus is on leaders and preachers and, this and that, and maybe as it should be to some point, but it's about God and what God is doing around any of us, and even sometimes despite any of us, God is still working. Yeah, David, last word.
When we pray, we should let God have it.
Yeah,
Take care of it.
that's right. Yeah, really, do we really turn it over to Him? That's a good word. All right, thank you all so much for your participation, and we'll see you next week. And I don't know, we may just skip the rest of chapter 2. Carol already told us that Eli dies, so, I don't know why we need to read it now. Shame on you. That's good. Hey, Dave.